Hi, everyone. I'd like to do a shout out to our sponsor, Baco Diagnostics. Early detection is the single most important factor in improving patient outcomes. The Baco Diagnostics team recognizes how impactful a podiatric physician can be and remains committed to supporting you in your role as the first line of defense in diagnosing conditions of the lower extremity. Thanks to the unwavering support of their clients, Baco Diagnostics has been able to give back to the podiatric community for 16 years by providing podiatric educational resources and advocating for the position. Baco Diagnostics, helping podiatric physicians keep America on its feet. If you have not yet had the opportunity to utilize Baco Diagnostics services, get started today by sending an email to corporate.relations@bacodiagnostics.com. The first 50 podiatry offices who request a starter kit will receive a Dean's Chat mug. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Dean's Chat, where we discuss all things podiatric medicine. My name is Dr. Jeffrey Jensen. I'm the Dean at the Arizona College of Podiatric Medicine and the host for the Dean's Chat podcast. Once again, I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Joanna Richey. Hi, Joe.
Hey, Jeff. How you doing?
You know, I am doing great. I am super excited about today's interview. Dr. Glaser has had impact on both of us.
Yes, I am also really excited about today.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Ed Glaser, welcome to Dean's Chat.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You are welcome. Dr. Glaser, we're very informal on Dean's Chat. And if it's okay with you, let's just go first names, Ed, Joe, and Jeff.
Yeah, it's fine.
All right, sounds good. Let me give you a little more formal introduction. Dr. Edward Glaser is a podiatrist and foot biomechanist, and he's the mind behind the MASS, capital M, capital A, capital S, posture theory of foot biomechanics. He's the founder of a very successful orthotic lab, Soul Supports. It's one of the largest orthotic providers in the country. Dr. Glaser is also, or Ed, is also a professional speaker, having lectured at over 1,500 medical and state society meetings. Soul Support orthotics are worn by many active professional and college athletes, Olympic winners, and are the preferred foot orthotic for over 50 military bases. Dr. Glaser earned his doctorate degree at the New York College of Podiatric Medicine. And after 13 years in practice, he made the bold decision to step away and challenge conventional orthopedics by developing his own biomechanical theories. We're going to hear all about them today. So 30 years and a million pair of orthotics later, Ed is continuing to realize his life mission with Soul Supports as he founded his lab in 1992. Ed, I'll never forget the dinner we had, or lunch we had about 7 years ago in Miami, and you were playing your ukulele. We were talking about your theories on biomechanics. But also, you know, we'll get to this in a minute. You made a tremendous impact on Joe when you came to visit Midwestern many years ago and helped clarifying some biomechanical theories. So welcome again to Dean's Chat. It's an honor and a privilege to have you on.
Yeah, I'm really surprised that Joe, of all the years that I didn't speak there, she was there the year I did, which was pretty cool.
Well, Joe,
great.
it did. Joe, your thoughts right out of the gates.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited about this opportunity, Ed, mostly because I love talking with people who are willing to look at something a little differently and think a little outside of the box. And I remember I was a second year student, so this would have been 2007, something like that. And I was struggling with some of the concepts of biomechanics, as early students often do. And even just this idea of like, how does the subtalar joint function? And you had these graphics in, I think it was like a sports lecture, like an after hours club event, something that you had come. We got to make an orthotic using your device, which again, as a student is always fun to have something hands-on. But what really sat really well with me and that I appreciated so much is the way you described the motion of the subtalar joint from a mechanics perspective. And your background, and having now looked at your CV in mechanical engineering, I would love to get your take on how you started to come up with all of this, because you had these 3D graphics that really showed the function of the foot during gait. And it was the first time that I, as a student, was like, why didn't anybody else explain it like this? Like, that just makes so much sense. Like the shape of the joint. And if you look at the shape of the joint, you can figure out the motion of the joint. But it gets complicated because we have multiple joints working together. And the way that you broke that down was, for an early learner anyway, was so valuable. So I'd love to get your take on your background with this kind of engineering medical interest. How did you get into all of this?
Well, firstly, I got into podiatry because I had two podiatrists on my paper route when I was a kid. And then when I went to school, of course, I grew up, my parents always trying to convince me to be a doctor. So I always had this leaning toward pre-med. But about the second year in college, I got more interested in my roommate's work than what I was learning. And he was a mechanical engineering student. So I switched over and tried to double major in mechanical engineering and biology. Unfortunately, I finished neither in 4 years. So I had to go to work. I had 4 years of scholarship. In New York, the top 5% on the National Regents exam get free tuition at any state school for 4 years. So that ran out. So I went to work as an assistant engineer for Sperry Gyroscope, designing Navy radar systems. And very interesting, but kind of boring for after a while. So I decided to go back to school and choose one. And I chose biology so I could go to podiatry school. So I never did get my ME degree. I was just a few credits from it. But it really gave me an appreciation for physics. So when I got into school, the reason I chose podiatry was because I wanted to be a mechanical engineer, and the foot is just a machine to get you from here to there. And I wanted to understand the machine. Unfortunately, a lot of what I learned in school, in its application, not so much in its basic science. I have to give Root and Weed enormous credit. They were going through the jungle with a machete and blazing an entirely new path. And without their work, there's no way I could have done mine. And in fact, I found out later from Chip Sutherland, actually the head of biomechanics at Barry at the time we went to lunch, that Root had actually laid out the criteria of normalcy in his book. Of course, I've got Root right here, Biomechanical Examination of the Foot. Page 34, he talks about the 8 criteria of normalcy, of ideal. And it seemed to me that he was absolutely right in every single one of them, except when I watched people walking in ruche and orthoses, I didn't see them achieving those goals. And I asked Chip, I said, what? Chip said, you don't disagree with Root. You actually achieved his life's goals. In other words, if you go down the list of all 8 criteria, they all are exactly in alignment when you're in mass posture, which is fascinating. Even though mass is a little north of neutral. And the reason is it's a calibrated spring. When you put your weight on a spring, it will deflect. How far will it deflect? F equals kx. The force the spring delivers is a constant, the spring constant, which we can adjust by changing the thickness of the plastic times the times the displacement of the spring. So the force, which is a great machine to use to control pronation. Why? The further you pronate, the more it fights back. The harder it works to resist it. My difficulty is knowing, firstly, how high to go in the arch, and then how hard to push. And how high to go seemed very logical to me. If you're trying to control emotion, you can't control any part of it that's already happened. It's like a pilot. There's nothing more useless to a pilot than the air above you or the runway behind you. So if you collapse a third of the way before you cast, you've given away a third of your correction. And I decided, with the inefficiency of machines in general, both the foot and the orthotic are a machine, we can't afford to give up a third of our correction. And then I found out that labs fill in the arches and lower it, something Root never said to do.
Yeah, they do.
Root would stick a piece of paper between the arch and the foot, and if it didn't rip, The orthotic was no good. So he wanted you to bear weight, but he allowed you to collapse your arch further. And I felt like I wanted to control that. And after years and years of thinking about it and debating the top minds in the field, I realized that there's only one thing that biomechanists agree upon. And it was discovery of root, that the foot locked in supination and unlocked or loosened its structure in pronation. That's the only thing we agree upon. I mean, you could look at Benno Nigg's preferred pathway theory and supination resistance by Craig Payne and Kirby's medially deviated subtalar axis. The only thing I don't agree on any of that stuff. I do agree that the foot locks and unlocks and that posture controls function. So my game was, how close can I bring a person to the ideal gait cycle without overcorrecting and causing new problems? Yeah. Luckily, orthotics have a huge therapeutic index because of the inefficiency. In other words, the therapeutic index is the distance between the therapeutic dose and the lethal dose. We have a huge space that we can make mistakes in. And the reason is because both machines are terribly inefficient. If you can eke out just a little bit of change, you're lucky. So I decided, let's get as aggressive as we possibly could and go further than starting at the beginning. Let's take our shape by evenly compressing the soft tissues as well. So I kept experimenting different ways of casting. And finally, I did heel, fifth metatarsal, and then pushed the met heads in, but the foam would lift up the toes and tighten the windlass and lower the arch. One day I was teaching at Campbell's Clinic in Memphis, Tennessee, and it was a group of physical therapists around me, and a couple of the orthopods walked by, and they listened to me complain about this fascial groove that was in my orthotic. And one of them said, "Why don't you push the toes in first?" Stupid. Immediately, we started pushing the toes in first, and that gave us a much higher arch. So we started at the beginning. The hard part was how hard to push. And luckily, Isaac Newton told us. He said, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. You want to know how much vertical force a curved piece of plastic will exert on the human body? The answer is, how much are you pushing in the opposite direction? And we could determine that with three factors, three main ones. Firstly, how much do you weigh? That's the obvious. Secondly, how flexible are you? And if you're extremely flexible, the ligaments are not helping, so the orthotic has to work. And thirdly, momentum. How fast are you moving? Because impact is decelerations, slowing down as a function of time. In other words, how long does it take you to slow down? Run your car into a mile of pillows. You slow down very slowly, no impact. Run your car into a stone building. You hit hard.
Decelerate very quickly. Yeah.
you decelerate quickly. Yeah. The trouble is, with orthotics, you walk to the curb, notice it's raining, and you run to your car. So you don't change orthotics at the curb. The other problem with choosing a posture like I did, which I'll give you the faults of my theory, is that no one posture is ideal for every activity. The foot is capable of so many postures for so many different activities. And am I ideal for everything? No, I can't be. There's no way. So certain sports may require different postures. And unfortunately, that's going to take the doctor making adjustments in the orthotic. That's why the doctors are so necessary in this, because I don't see the patient walk. I'm a central fab. The challenges of a central fab is coming up with techniques that are repeatable.
Mm.
And I saw that as one of the biggest problems with Russian technology. Nothing to do with his theory. His theory was beyond brilliant. It had to do with the application that we were casting with the foot hanging in space with no frame of reference. When you want the same thing to come out every time, you want to make Yeti cups. You take a big steel frame, you bolt it to the ground, and you stamp them off a frame. That's your frame of reference. Space has no frame of reference. Every time you cast, it's wildly different. I would reference Craig Payne's 2003 article in JAPMA, where he took 10 experienced doctors, 10 brand new students, and the guru of casting, and they all cast the same foot. The guru casted it 10 times. And you know what? All three groups had a 12-degree variation in forefoot to rear foot relationship, which is the major determinant of arch height. The relationship is like this, you're flat. If the relationship is like this, you have an arch. So basically, and between groups, they found 16.5 degrees. So I had met Craig at a conference. They said, whose foot did you use? He said, mine. I said, let me see it. And I grabbed his foot. He only had 16.5 degrees of motion. They found it all.
One for every calf.
I said, imagine if you used somebody who could move. He had a rigid.
So Ed, I always find it interesting. You are coming up with these theories, and you're building upon giants in the biomechanics field. After practicing for 13 years, you took a leap of faith, right? Your theories made sense to you. You had an engineering background. What was that like, leaving practice and starting a business? And in many ways, you were fighting the establishment.
I was, and you know what? I felt like I was getting such good results on my patients. Other doctors were asking me to make orthotics for them. And finally, one of my patients came in who had a terrible knee problem. And I said, I might be able to help that with an orthotic. And I made him a pair. And sure enough, his knee pain since childhood disappeared. So he said to me, this is so good. Maybe we should start a business. And he was a retired lawyer. So he started making orthotics in my garage. And that was the beginning of Soul Supports. And then one day I was in Oklahoma City lecturing, actually for the Oklahoma Physical Therapy Association. And I went by the Cowboy Museum, and they had a statue of Will Rogers. And I walked in, and there was a quote from Will Rogers that just struck me. It said, even if you're on the right track, you're going to get run over if you sit there long enough. I decided to change tracks and leave practice. I gave up a $500,000 a year practice in the 80s, which was big, to make $27,000 a year grinding orthotics in my garage.
With your lawyer buddy, patient.
With my lawyer buddy, who quit after the first 2 years. Because what happened was, when I joined him, he had to split the income with me. And he made less money and was working twice as hard. He goes, at this rate, soon I'll be working 24 hours a day and making nothing.
So excuse me, Ed, would you have taken that leap if your friend as a patient hadn't have said anything about, we need to do this for masses as opposed to one-offs?
I had tried several times to create an orthotics lab, and it failed for various reasons, because I was trying to be full-time as a podiatrist and do it on the side. So I had one guy who was phenomenal at making orthotics, but he would get drunk and not show up for a few days. I had to close that lab. I started in my barn, actually. I had one property, and it ended up in my garage at the second property.
Wow.
Luckily, I had 5 acres, and my garage was 200 yards back from the house. Trouble is, we didn't have running water, and back then we poured plaster. We had to carry 2 5-gallon buckets of water. We didn't even have a bathroom. We had an outhouse.
Joe, your thoughts?
There's so many things that I would love to get your take on. The first one, I'm going to jump onto that right now, just because it was what you just said last. The other is on biomechanics research. So let me not forget that, because I get really excited when I have someone I want to ask a million questions to. So did that impact your decision on casting technique and material based on some of the constraints of previous labs that you had worked in? Not only in consistency of the cast that people send in, which goes to the question on research, but then also on just the materials of producing an orthotic on the other side, just some of the constraints. I think that was interesting, not having some running water. Did that impact some of your decision-making in how you designed ultimately your casting technique?
Oh, absolutely. At the beginning, I accepted plaster casts, slipper casts. Then I stopped. Once I developed the casting technique, I made people take a course. Other labs were advertising for business. I was putting an obstacle in people's way, saying, if you want, it's a privilege if you want to use sole supports. So if you want to use it, you have to pass a course in biomechanics and casting. And we actually had a certification. You had to be certified to use it. And you know what? That worked better than advertising. People wanted to be an exclusive club that were allowed to use sole supports. And also,
I think that also, go ahead.
I would take away from people if they sent in bad casts.
Oh, interesting. In terms of quality control, I could definitely see, though, too, you've put your experience and expertise into designing something, and something that is so much also an art as it is a science, such as orthotics. I can see how having a program where you train people how to use this technique has a lot of value. I mean, you just quoted that study that looked at, 10 different people doing the same cast on one person, 10 different casts come out of it, which then kind of leads me into this question about biomechanics research. I find it so interesting that we haven't had really good evidence supporting a custom orthotic being significantly better than an over-the-counter orthotic. And I have my own things that I think is why, but I'm curious what your take is on current biomechanics research when it comes to orthotic therapy and what you think could be done to make it better in the future.
I have to go back. I was invited in 1999 to speak at the Georgia State University. And they had just experienced the Olympics in '96 in Atlanta. And they turned the gymnasium in the basement of Georgia State into the second most high-tech gait lab in the country at the time, with one of the earliest 10-camera motion analysis systems. And I read everything by the people inviting me, and they had made their career proving orthotics didn't work.
Yeah.
So I was walking into the lion's den. And at the end of my lecture, they said, interesting, let's go down to the gait lab. And they hooked me up, and I showed them me walking in Russian orthoses, walking in mass posture orthoses, and then walking with just the shoe with nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And after 2 hours, they were so excited. They started 4 research projects. 2 have been published. And they showed that raising the arch with a spring actually mechanically improved gait 61% better than the best orthotic they had ever tested. And at the time, they had tested all 17 of the largest orthotic labs in America. So we beat the best, which was PAL at the time. And they used something not subjective, actual measurement of pressures on the first metatarsal at toe off, because Root, and I don't know how he knew this was brilliant, said that 60% of the force at toe off should be under the first metatarsal. That's why it's larger and has sesamoids. The sesamoids are shearing force reducers, by the way. They stay stationary with the skin while the metatarsal rolls over the sesamoid. So I started looking at how I could capture the foot in its best posture, looking at it from an exercise standpoint. When you learn an exercise, go to an exercise physiologist, an athletic trainer, a personal trainer, they'll show you good form for the exercise. Mm-hmm. won't say lean sideways and do it any way you like. They'll show you tuck your elbows, pull your stomach in, your shoulders back, your head back, isolate the muscle safely, and you'll build it up. Basically, all I do is I've given people good form for standing and walking. And Root described it perfectly on page 34 of his first book. And the only thing is, I asked Bill Orion and Tom Scarlato. I said, why didn't you guys do this? And they said, we talked about it. Unfortunately, the thermoplastics were just not there. I said, why did you choose Roador? And they said, Mert thought orthotics should last 5 years. I said, that's a good reason. I mean, I could understand that. But he never tried to use the arch as a control plane. And posture is different than position. Position is picking a point of rotation around a singular axis. The foot doesn't have one axis. It has 35 joints, 26 bones. All of them have axes or slide on each other, still moving around an axis, but sliding.
And interacting with each other.
Yeah, if you look at the posterior facet, its axis points. The posterior facet points toward the middle facet. The sliding that goes on when the heel hits the ground and stops moving forward, the forward momentum of the body causes the talus to slide forward, but the angle of this moves it onto the middle facet, which sits on a shelf, a lever arm. So when it loads the middle facet, it begins to evert the calcaneus. Now the tail is sitting on the anterior facet, slides off the tilted anterior facet, and drops in the sagittal plane. So really, the locking mechanism is not, as Root says, axes going askew. By the way, that wasn't his theory. That was Elftman's theory that Scarlato brought in. I used to go meet Tom Scarlato in his driveway. Whenever I came up with something new, the price of admission was 3 $35 cigars. Which he would probably put away and save them for somebody more important than me.
That's fabulous. A couple comments. I think I still have some Roadur in my lungs from making orthotics at California College. Ed.
You know what? I had a big box of it, and one of my employees used it to fill in some cement. Oh, I was mad. It's the last Roadur on earth.
I think it's interesting because your theories and your influence on biomechanics didn't emanate from the San Francisco Bay Area or the California College with Root, Weed, Orion, Kirby, Scarlato, on and on, Phil Massey.
I have to say, without them, we wouldn't even have a language to discuss biomechanics.
Well said.
I mean, I wouldn't know the motions of the foot or what to call them. I mean, they laid the groundwork. They paved the path for me. Like they built the whole building and I redecorated the top floor.
Oh, there you go.
What's that quote about artists, right? Artists, the whole process of art is stealing and building upon what others have created. So there you go. It's just continuing that long tradition of art.
To quote Isaac Newton, if I've seen further than others, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's interesting that you got involved with that group after the '96 Olympics in Atlanta, because I can't think of a more disparate group of elite athletes than sprinters, middle distance runners, marathoners, shot putters. I mean, it goes across the board. Talk about different animal for different needs at different times.
I thought I was treating the most elite athletes at one time. But then I got involved in the military.
Oh, there.
I was lecturing for the North Carolina Podiatric Medical. When I got off the podium, I was surrounded by uniforms. I said, "Am I in trouble?" They said, No. We have a third-year resident here who's a 12-year triathlete, and 11 of those years she's taking multiple ibuprofen a day for the pain." And I said, 10 days. I looked at her problems, and they said, "What do you mean 10 days?" I said, I'm going to make her 3 pairs of orthotics, one to run the marathon in, one to live in, and one to bicycle in. And in 10 days, she'll be pain-free. When she was, they pain-free in 10 days. The head of podiatry department called me up and said, would you lecture at Bragg? I said, I'd love to. I'll do it for free. They said, all right, now that you're coming, would you treat the 5 worst cases of foot pain in special forces? I said, special forces? No. I said, why not? They said, your 5 worst could be so broken, nobody could fix them. Give me a chance. Give me 25, and we got a deal. And they did. 25 of the worst, worst painful plantar fasciitis I've ever seen in my life. I mean, guys suffering 10 to 15 years. None of us would even stand up in that pain. And they start every day with a 12-mile march with an 80-pound pack. And I immediately realized 80 boasts their body weight. Now I have to calibrate for a different number. So I gave everyone 2 pairs, one for their body weight uniform, one for their body weight uniform and the pack size they told me. Then they came back to me about 3 weeks later, and they sent me a text. They're all extremely satisfied. So I called up the chief of podiatry. I said, translate that for me. They said, you just saved us $25 million. It cost us $1 million apiece to train these guys, and they all re-signed with the military, every one of them. I said, wow. So what do you want? They said, supply Bragg. Well, I said, sure. But I could not figure out for the life of me, I am not a businessman. I could not figure out how to get paid. I applied for a DOD number and 3 TRICARE numbers, an NPI number. I did everything they asked, and they wouldn't pay me. So I said, how many special forces could there be? Give it to them. So one day they called me up and said, you're breaking the law. I said,
geez.
They said, you can't give anything to the military. I said, oh, so what do you want? I'll stop. He goes, no, don't stop. They said, we'll figure it out. So they went off base, and there was this little store called Tactical Rehab with 5 employees. They had 2 locations. And they said, if you'll use this orthotic, we'd give you 100% of our business. It wasn't 2 weeks later, they called me from Lejeune, then Pendleton. Now we're at about 50 military bases across the country. And we're swamped this summer. They've decided to put the Pacific Fleet in our orthotics, which is wild.
That is so awesome.
Yeah, I tell you what, it really said to me that if you could change these guys, if you could cure these guys with such severe almost decades of plantar fasciitis in a matter of 3 weeks, then I really realized I had something, So Tactical's now grown to about 12 stores and 75 employees. But they're just like any other customer to me, except their stuff gets priority because, you know why? Because they keep moving the people. I got to get back to them before they move them someplace.
Oh, that's fabulous. Oh my gosh, what a great story. Ed, before we talk about some other odds and ends, I thought I'd do a shout out to our sponsor for Dean's Chat, Baco Diagnostics. We all know that early detection is the most important determination in improving patient outcomes. Baco Diagnostics remains committed to supporting you in your role as the first line of defense in diagnosing lower extremity pathologies. Baco Diagnostics, helping podiatric physicians keep America on its feet. It sounds like your role with the military, keeping them on their feet there, Ed.
It is. It's really an honor to serving the people that serve us. They are the most extreme athletes in the world, and they have a motivator that I could never give people. The most powerful motivator in the world is a sense of duty. Yes. Only a sense of duty will make you run across a field of flying bullets.
Well said.
The second most important motivator by far is purpose. Purpose you can give people. And early on, I went to a business consultant, and he said, choose a core value, something you absolutely believe in, and walk it, live it, breathe it. Start every meeting with it, end every meeting with it, answer every question with it. And I came up with we make people better. And now if I go to soul supports and I walk in a room, everybody goes quiet because they're waiting for me to yell, what do we do here? And they all yell back, we make people better.
Oh, I love it.
Every meeting,
I love it.
That's not a piece of plastic in your hand. That's somebody's health. And that people will, by the way, they'll never follow, we buy Ed a boat.
Of course. No, I like the duty and purpose. I think that in a nutshell talks about human motivation.
It does, really. And that's been my purpose from the beginning. I never understood business. I never understood money at all. First day I married my wife, I handed her the checkbooks. I said, I never want to see him again.
Oh, that's great. Joe, this is phenomenal. Any other questions that you have?
I do. I have one final question.
Okay.
So when you had come, Ed, you had these graphics that at 2007 time were not really, there was no YouTube for me to like try to Google things. There was Google, I'll give you that, but definitely not in the way that it is now in its existence. When you first had your vision of helping explain the subtalar joint and foot function in general, how did you, and I have to say, anyone who is listening to this and not watching, you have to go back and watch the YouTube because Dr. Glaser has a giant calcaneus, which I totally want a copy of because that's outstanding. How did you come up with yeah, that's just fantastic. When you pulled that out, I was just like, oh, I love it so much. My students will appreciate that.
He's a tailorist.
Oh, I love it. That's fabulous. So how did you come up with your graphics and like your props? Like, how did you put all of that creativity together?
One day, my daughter asked me if I would interview a friend of hers for a graphics job, and he was doing three-dimensional animations as a hobby. I mean, who did that as a hobby back before Star Wars? And he came in for the interview with 2 purple mohawks. And I think he had a paisley shirt and a plaid pants that didn't make it to his socks. I think his pants were held on by a safety clip. And he started talking, and I said, this person is brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant. I said, you're hired. I remember one day I walked up to him with his 2 mohawks, and I said, I got to ask you something. And I asked him this in-depth question. He goes, why are you consulting with me? I said, because you're the most normal person I know. And you know something? Today he is. He's married, has 3 kids, and he now has a normal haircut. And he's been working for almost 20 years. Oh, by the way, nobody ever leaves working for me. The joke in my town is working for me is a life sentence.
I love it.
But I'll tell you the real reason I reinvented biomechanics. It's the posting. The posting really hit me wrong. It's like taking a round object, the heel, you're placing it in a round cup, and then tilting the cup 2 or 4 degrees. That's a ball and socket. It will seek its own position. Then I said the skin moves medially and laterally. So I made a little silicone device to hold the calcaneus steady and measured the movement. And it moves 7 to 10 degrees in each direction. So here you put a 4-degree post, it's plus or minus 7 to 10 degrees. Wow. And I learned physics not as mathematics, but as concepts. I wanted to look at a mathematical formula and read what it says to me. Like when I see F equals ma, acceleration is a change in velocity in a unit of time. Velocity is a change in position in a unit of time. So force is inversely proportional to the square of time in English. You want to do some work, you have a little bit of force. It takes a long time. You could dig the Grand Canyon in 10 million years. I know you're in Arizona, so 10 million years with a river. You could also dig it in 5 minutes with an earthquake, probably 2 minutes with a nuclear explosion. Different amount of force, different amount of time. How much time do you have from heel strike to full pronation? Well, I measured it. I bought a high-speed camera, and at 3 miles an hour, it's 0.05 seconds. There's simply not enough time for that little 2 or 4 degree tilt to apply enough corrective force to control the heel strike impact force, which can be 1.75 in walking to 5 times in running, depending on how good you are. There's not enough. When I teach at the Vanderbilt University Biomedical Engineering Department, the engineers fall on the floor laughing, going, "Doctors believe what?" I go, "I know." See, really, the two secrets to my success is that I can apply a greater corrective force for 2 reasons. Number one, I make the spring the shape of the foot with the soft tissues all pre-compressed. So now I'm evenly distributing force per unit area. So there's no hot spots. The second thing is, if you start out heel striking in inversion, your arch will be fairly high. When it drops, it will suddenly stop at the orthotic. The impact of ending pronation itself is both how the old orthotics worked. They worked by allowing you to pronate near the end of the range of motion, where you're slowing down, then you hit the orthotic, and by compressing your own soft tissue, you dampen the impact of pronation, making it much more comfortable. So they're great for comfort. But they didn't change the posture and therefore didn't change the function. So I wanted to change the function, and I eliminated impact by going the full contact all the way up in the arch. In other words, you never had to drop down to hit the orthotic. You were living on it. So it flexed with you. Then the hard part was, how do you calibrate? How do you measure the upward force? And you know how we did it? Pascal's law. Pressure inside of an enclosed container is equivalent in all directions. We blew up a bladder over the top of an orthotic in a steel container with a plexiglass 1-inch thick wall. And then we put marks on the plexiglass, to ruler marks, and we blew up the bladder. Every 0.002 of an inch, we took a measurement. So that was really slow. Then we found a way to computerize that, and now we're doing it using National Instruments. They have cards that will measure using optics. So we use a high-speed camera, and the whole thing is completely cycled using hydraulics. Yeah. So when they're operating the machine, you have one hand all the way over here, as far out as you can go, and the other hand all the way out here, because if anyone sticks their hand in that machine when it closes, their hand is calibrated.
Oh, that's funny. Hey, Ed, I'd like to extend an invitation for Dr. Glaser Part 2. We're running out of time, and we have a whole lot of things I still want to talk about. We haven't talked about your, half of your CV, and if you're willing to come back and join Joe and I on a later date, we're extending an invitation right now.
I tell you, I accept, and I'll tell you the reason is, in the last about 10 years ago, I was teaching in Seattle, and a young man came up to me and said, "Your orthotics, you say, take a month to get used to." I said, "If you're lucky." And he said, "I do it in 8 minutes per foot." And I said, "That's not possible." And he showed me 12 points on the foot. If you touch them using this high-tech instrument called a pencil eraser, so lightly they can't even feel it, all foot pain, with the exception of gout and neuropathy, is gone, and usually permanently, which is the greatest thing in the world. And I figured out exactly how it works. all the parts of the pieces of the puzzle were in the literature. And now I'm teaching it at conventions. I'm coming out to Arizona to speak at the Arizona Association of Chiropractors this month.
Well, we're going to discuss that. We'll discuss that, and we're going to discuss your passion for ukuleles, and we're going to discuss your philanthropic efforts. But we're going to have to save that for next time, Ed, because we're running out of time.
And we'll have to do rapid fire next time, because we have to do rapid fire. All the fun rapid fire questions, right?
We're just getting started, Ed. We're just getting started.
Well, thank you guys very much. I appreciate. I hate that I talked biomechanics the whole time, but I guess I'm like.
Oh, I love that you talked biomechanics the whole time.
And we're setting the stage for the next time too. It's just the best. Ed, Joe, and I send our guests a Dean's Chat mug.
Thank you.
You can drink your beverage of choice out of that. And then we will connect and get another date where we can do another Dean's Chat. It'll be Ed Glaser Unplugged Part 2.
Thank you very much.
All right. To all of our listeners out there, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, we sure would appreciate a 5-star rating, maybe a couple of comments. And if you're watching on YouTube, by all means, become a subscriber. Joe and I will continue to bring you leaders in podiatric medicine and surgery. And Ed, we are very grateful for you taking the time today to spend with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cheers.